This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.
I'm glad that you're still studying this great book of Genesis with us. We're in chapter 38, beginning in this session. We've seen some interesting things as we've gone through the book, but the one thing that we really have seen is the providence of God. God taking care all the way through history that there is going to be a Messiah, that there is going to be His Son come into this earth and will provide salvation. The overriding thing through all of this is God's providence that men might be saved. That's the thing that we always need to remember when we're studying back here. It's so easy to get wrapped up into what is happening and the events that are being recorded, and we become involved with it, and sometimes we become technically involved even with the text and with the words, that we lose sight of that it's God's love and providence that is being shown to us in all of this, preparing for the time when the church would be on the earth, this time. We want to, in this section, of course, realizing we're going to have a little aside, you will, if in history. We're going to talk about Judah and Tamar. Now, this section clearly shows how Jacob's sons were coming under the influence of the Canaanites around them. With the intermarriages, it would not be long until all of his descendants would have been absorbed into the larger group. From this, it is easy to see why God would send them into Egypt, where they looked unfavorably on all foreigners, especially shepherds. This will force them to remain distinct as a people. And so even when we go in, and of course the story as we have it here all ends with good. Knowing history and knowing as it goes on from there, we see that the people are really in a captivity sort of situation there, and they're looked down upon, used as slaves. But again, the providence of God. They could have remained here, but He sent them to where they would remain as a distinct people, His people. Well, Judah, he leaves the family to go outside and find wives. He leaves and he marries outside, and he has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. He has these 3 sons. Well, they grow, of course, but there's not much space taken as far as the text is concerned. But immediately we now have being ready to marry, and so Judah then gets a wife for him. This is the normal way that they did things at that time. Well, was evil. Well, think about that. Judah is living out among the others, about these evil people. He marries one of their people. What do you expect from the children? More than likely, they're going to turn out to be evil too, and this is what has happened. This is what has happened. And so what happened? The Lord let him die. The Lord simply let the man die. Well, this then places a responsibility back on Judah. So he gives her then to the second son, Onan, so that he can raise up an heir for his brother. This is the pattern that has been established with him now. But I want you to notice that it is Judah's responsibility now to take care of Tamar. He is the patriarch. He is the head of the family. And so it is his responsibility to take care of her. See, she left her father. She left that family. And she's now a part of this one. It is now his responsibility to take care of her and everything surrounding her. It is his responsibility. Even though we're going to see that he does send her back to the father for a while, but even while she's there, who's responsible? Her father? No. Judah. He is the one that's going to be responsible in the situation. He's the one that's going to have to make decisions about her. All right. Well, Onan is now going to refuse to give her children. Why? We have to ask this. Is there selfishness involved? We don't know for sure. We don't know. Did he not want to preserve his brother's family? Was there greed involved in all of this? You know that if he does not then preserve a seed for him, well, then the inheritance might be broken up just a little bit differently, you see. We're down to 2 brothers instead of 3 in the families. We don't know. We're not told. But these things, and God recognizes the evil in this man also. Onan is not fulfilling one of the purposes of marriage here. He is not fulfilling it as he should. So what happens? We see God again letting this one die as well. Letting him die as well. Again, it's the providence of God working. We don't understand. God doesn't tell us why he does things all the time, and we just have to leave it in his good judgment. But he lets this one also die. But we have a problem now, do we not? How about now this last son? The last son, what are we going to do? Judah does not give Tamar to Shelah. Why again? We ask these questions. We don't know for sure. Is it that he could have considered her as what we would say a bad luck in the family? That wherever she goes, there are problems. Could it be that this is mixed with fear? I got her and brought her in and gave her to my first son, and he dies, and gives her to the second son, and he dies, and what's going to happen to my third son? You can understand if these thoughts are there. Again, he's lost 2 sons being married to her. We don't know the reasoning, but you can understand some fears that just might simply be there during this time. All right, Judah's and Tamar's deceit. You notice I use the plurals in there. Judah's and Tamar's deceits. Judah's son is old enough to marry, but he does not give Tamar to him as he should. Tamar then deceives Judah by disguising herself as a harlot, and then conceives children by Judah. It seems that at this time the normal price or fee was a kid of a goat, that this was the normal fee for a harlot, and he does not have it with him, so he has to leave a pledge. She asks for a pledge from him. Well, what is the pledge? Well, it seems like quite a bit. A signet, a seal, a staff, and bracelets. The man, he really had to trust her, didn't he, with this? It would seem to me that these would be some very wealthy items, worth more than a kid, I would think. Well, Judah's out here. He's living in this territory, and the men and the people of the area are his friends, so he sends this friend of his with the kid to pay the debt, to take to this prostitute, to Tamar, really. And he does not know, of course, that it is Tamar. Well, he goes back and he inquires. He can't find her. In fact, the men of the area say, well, there is no prostitute in this area. And so there's a little confusion here. What's happening? What's going on? And so he has to go back and report that now to Judah, that this person is just simply not there. Well, he says, in essence, if I go and try to track her down, this will just make my sin more public, more shameful. Well, at least he's got that much still within him, even though he has committed this sin. Again, as I said before, we're getting into verses 24 through 26 now. Who is still responsible for Tamar? Judah is. He is the one that is responsible for her. She has become pregnant by him. Now, he's not aware of that at this time. He's not aware at all. And so when it comes, that knowledge comes to him, he just pronounces the regular sentence upon her that he would for anybody in that situation. She's wrong, she needs to be put away, period. Done away with. Well, she seems to be pretty wise at this point. So she sends the tokens, the pledges, and said, whose these belong to, the man whose these are, is the father. Well, it doesn't take Judah long to recognize his own things. and recognize his incest at the situation. And it's rather amazing to me, but he says and pronounces that he himself is more guilty than she. Think about that. He is more guilty. He has at least thought about the situation. He realizes that she has deceived him. She hasn't really been a prostitute. She has not gone out as a professional lady prostitute. She has not done that, but she has deceived him personally. And he says, she is more righteous than I, because she had children coming to her. I did not provide it through my sons, therefore she deceived me. I should have given her on to Shelah, the last son. I should have done that, but I did not. So her actions are better. Well, that's a relative term, isn't it, when you talk about sin? What sin is better than another? All sin is sin. All sin will lose your soul. God is the judge of what sin is heavier than others. Yes, we read in the New Testament in Corinthians that there is going to be more punishment for these than for others, and through other passages the Lord mentions it. We know then that there are degrees of punishment. But that's God's business. It's not yours and mine. Sin is sin. Sin condemns the soul. And you are simply lost when you sin. It's not up to us to say which sin is more heinous than any other. We are not God. All sin is against Him, not against you and me directly, but in its essence is really against Jehovah God. And He's the one then that has to make the judgment, make the sentence, if you will. He's the one that will figure out and will know, and of course He already does, which is more heinous to Him than any other. But we have here Judah at least recognizing that he has been deceitful and wrong in all of this. So what happens? Now, twins. Twins are born to Tamar, Perez and Zerah. Now, Zerah was the firstborn. The maid that was there, she tied a red cord on his wrist when it came out. But then it went back in, and Perez actually comes out fully first. And his name means forging forth, a forging forth. Then we move back into the mainstream of our history here, moving back with Joseph. He's in Egypt. And chapters 39 through 41 are his promotion in Egypt. We have in 39 his imprisonment. There are quite a few lessons as we go through this particular section. Several lessons that we need to stop and to look at and to make sure we understand. But first I want you to understand that God is really putting Joseph, through a lot of training in all of this. Think of the impact of being sold as a slave by his brethren. Think of the things and all the things that bear on that young man's mind. And then being taken off and sold again, this time in Egypt. Being somebody else's property. Well, here he is in Potiphar's house. He's in Egypt. And God is blessing him. And what is he learning while he's there? Well, at least two things. Number one, he's learning the Egyptian ways. He's learning their culture. He's learning their way of life. He knows what is proper there. He knows what is improper. You see, he's a foreigner. None of these things would have been natural to him over in this other society. And so God is training him for something. He is learning. He's learning in this household. And this is a very influential man. It's a strong man within the country. And so his position is really a favored one in that he is going to receive that education. But also, he's going to learn good business administration. Yes, the Lord is with him. The Lord is with him through all of this. But he is learning how to manage things. He's learning how to manage not only things, but he's learning how to manage people as well. The whole thing of managing a great household has come to him. I look back through history and I see how great men always, it seemed, had great men working for them. Oh, they might be called the head butler, or maybe it was in women, the housemaid, the one that was fully in charge of an estate. But great people who had good management skills, who were able to work with others, had things under control. This is the kind of training now that Joseph is receiving. Now he's going to be put in prison. We know that. Here he is. He's been a slave. He's hauled away to another society. He's sold to a person over there. He's moving up. He's over the head of this house. He's learning their ways. He's learning business administration. All of a sudden, where is he? In prison. Would this humble you? I think it would. I think this would humble me. I'm sure it did him. Then what happens? God still prospers the man. Still prospers the man. Well, think about this. God has been working with him all the way through all of this. When Joseph's character is perfected, then, and I say only then, is he able to help his brothers when they come, to put them through certain tests, if you will, to help them mature, to be able to judge correctly if they are judging between themselves, or if there is properly, or whether there is still jealousy and things like this. And so God is perfecting this man's character so that he will be a help to the rest of them. God's providence still working in all of this. Did you notice we just finished up with the little aside talking about Judah and Tamar. But did you notice how he was contaminated by everything that surrounded him, it seemed like? That he was being brought into the worldly ways, that he was going off into what they were doing in the world and following their ways, doing their things. But here we have Joseph. He's not being contaminated by these things around him. He is still a godly person. He's still looking to Jehovah. He's not entering into their ways. Would have it been easy, sold as a slave, to become a worldly person then as a slave, but then moving up in that household? Could that have affected him? Worldly ways? It certainly could. But we find that Joseph is not that way. It didn't affect him like it did Judah. And so we have a lesson here as well as we look at the whole thing. He has not gone into the worldly ways, but did this ensure that he was going to have an easy life? No. Even though he is sent off into a better prison than some, he's still in prison. Did evil things come to him? Over and over during his life, things had come to him. Just because he was a righteous person did not mean that everything was going to be smooth and easy. In fact, today, it's just the opposite, is it not? We live in a very cruel world. And if we are really honest with ourselves and honest in trying to evangelize others, we're going to come into problems just because we love them and want to help them, and they don't want it. And so, living a righteous life does not guarantee that you're going to have an easy life. Not at all. Well, back into the storyline now. What about Potiphar? Potiphar in Egypt buys Joseph from the Ishmaelites. Again, Joseph is prospered by Jehovah. And Joseph is then made master of his master's entire estate. Can you imagine that now? God has really prospered him, and he just keeps coming up, rising to the top, if you will. He rules everything. Now, when we say that, we mean truly he was master of everything in the house. In fact, the scripture says, really, what did he have to worry about? Nothing. Nothing. What was Potiphar's only concern in life? What he was going to have for his next menu, for his next meal. He didn't have any concerns. Joseph took care of everything. What a life of ease he had because he owned this slave. And again, this is something else we need to understand, especially when we get up into the first century. There were a lot of slaves, but many times the slaves were more educated than their owners, much more capable of managing things and to keep things organized and to run things, much more capable than their owners. You see, they would go out, let's say in the first century or even earlier, but the Greeks or the Romans would go conquer a people. They would take everybody then as slaves. Well, we're talking about the head of the city governments. We're talking about people that had managed large households before. We're talking about very successful people in those communities that were taken over. They're now slaves. Who owns them? It might be a soldier. We don't know. And so a slave could be really a very precious thing to own if it was one of these types. And that's what we have in Joseph, one who is very superior in his intellect and, of course, with Jehovah being with him. And we see that clearly. It says now that Joseph was handsome. Really, the phrase is that he was beautiful in form and beautiful in appearance. As today we might say that he was simply well-built and good-looking. That's how the phrase might be here in my country. That's the way we would describe a person like this. Well, we have a problem, don't we? Potiphar has a wife who has some wrong designs, that wants to lie with Joseph. She wanted to take him to bed with her. What is Joseph's rejection? What is his defense against this lady? First of all, he could not betray his master's complete trust. He was not going to betray Potiphar. This man had trusted him. What next? She's his wife and is therewith held from him. Therefore, Potiphar had given everything into his care. Everything, of course, except his wife. She may not consider her position as much, but it does also carry responsibilities with it. And my friend, the conclusion: any sin is a sin against Jehovah God. Any sin is a sin against Him. And this is something that we really need to get straight. Yes, when somebody sins against us, we may take affront, but we've got to stop and think, no, this really is a sin against God. And this soul over here that sinned against us has allowed Satan to use this soul against us, against God. And when we get that straight, then we can look at that person, that soul, in a little different way. That the real problem behind all of this is Satan. Satan is now behind all of this and coming forward. This person is allowing Satan to use them. That's true. So what is our responsibility then is to let them see, to help them see that Satan is using them. When that happens, they'll recognize it as sin. They'll want forgiveness from God. More than likely, right in the process, from you also. But our job is not to be so much confronting with them, you. Recognize that they are being used, and they've allowed themselves to be used. And if they can then see that the enemy is not you or me or God, but is indeed Satan, when they can see that, then they can turn to God a whole lot easier. And that relationship can remain strong between the two of you. Okay, what happens then? She has been rejected. What happens so many, many times? It turns into hate. Rejection turns into hate. And she wants revenge for being turned down. Now, she's not just being turned down once or twice. The scriptures lets us know that this was a constant thing that she was trying to get him to do. She was really working hard to try to commit sin with this man. But he keeps rejecting her. It's through. It's over. And so she's going to seek revenge in some way. She is spurned. She hates him. She has offered herself again to him, and he flees the house, but the coat is left in her hand. And so now she has an opportunity for revenge. Now, talking about spurned love turning into hate. Does this happen any other places in Scripture? Well, it certainly does. Look on into the future from this point here. Ammon, son of David, and Tamar there. What happens? He goes in, he forces his sister, and then what happens? He hates her. He wanted her so bad, it seemed, and he lusted for her, yes, but oh, he just had to have this woman for himself. When it happens, ready to discard her, hated her, despised her. This should be a lesson for all young ladies. This happens all too often. A young man offers you love, he offers you care, he offers you concern, and then when he is able to lie with you, then it turns. You've been conquered, and he no longer wants you. And his concern and love turns to neglect, repulsion, even hatred sometimes. It happens. It does happen. Well, a lesson I want us to also learn from here, that is when a desire is unlawful, unholy, that the result is also sin, regardless of the way it turns out. God may turn it for good, but the result was still sin. It was a sinful act. I want you to notice also here that nobody in the house is going to substantiate her claims. Her husband comes home and she makes the false accusations against Joseph, and it appears that the entire household remains silent. Again, we can ask the question, why? Has she made overtures, advances to other male members of the staff? Is that a possibility? We don't know. We're not told. Is it possible that she's not always a truthful person? We don't know, but for some reason, nobody is corroborating her story. Could it be that they didn't believe her? We just simply don't know. So, there is no defense for her, really. It's just her word against whom? Joseph. What's her status? She's the wife. What's his? A slave. Now, would it do for Potiphar to accept the word of a slave, unverified, over the word of his wife, even though it's also unverified? No. No, that just simply would not do. You notice she says, the Hebrew servant who you brought to us. She includes Potiphar, if you will, as one of the guilty parties, but there's an implication here. The implication is that this person is a rapist, and you brought this rapist in not just to me, but to us. The implication is that there are others that could be at risk just because this young man's here. And you, Potiphar, brought him into the house. Oh, sin is so terrible and weaves such terrible webs around everybody and everything. Okay. What's going to be Potiphar's reaction to all of this? What will be his reaction? Well, the scripture does not say that Potiphar was angry with Joseph. It just does not say that. Now, this is truly a problem because of the position Joseph holds and the work he did for Potiphar. What was his concern? Where the next meal was going, what it was going to be, what he was going to eat. He had no other concerns. All of a sudden, his right-hand man is going to be out of the picture. He trusted him with everything. even the safety of his wife, and now this comes upon him. All right. He could not disprove his wife's statements, and it would not do, as I said before, to accept a slave's words over his wife's. To me, it would appear that Potiphar actually was angry with his wife, for the punishment for rape could be death, especially for a slave. Joseph receives what in contrast could be considered a very light punishment. And where is Joseph put? He is put in Pharaoh's prison with his prisoners, which is a preferred place, if you want to call it that, in prison. It is a preferred place. Now, Joseph, as the chief servant of the captain of the bodyguard, was just as important a man as any prisoner of the king might be. You see, Potiphar was a very high up, influential person. And so anyone that he would put in there is just as important as anybody that Pharaoh would put in there, and would receive better treatment. Yes, many people that were taken into captivity, that were put into prisons, were actually treated fairly well. Oh, we hear and we read of all the horror stories, which are true, more than likely. In fact, we may not know all of the details and facts. They may never come out to us. But there were places where there were favored positions, and quite honestly, that exists in my country today. There are those what we call white-collar crimes, where it's not robbery and rape and beating up, violence. It might be somebody tampering with the books and taking profits that way, or doing something else. We call it a white-collar crime. We have prisons that are really very fine accommodations. TVs, air conditioning, clean, immaculate surroundings, good food. Some even have telephones. This is prison. This is happening in my country. I know it isn't happening everywhere over the world, but it happens. There are preferred places for preferred prisoners. And this is what we have here. And so it says he was there in the prison, and the Hebrew indicates that this is a fairly lengthy time, not just a couple days or a couple of weeks or a couple of months, that we have some time involved here. Again, a long time. What happens? Jehovah is still with him. The providence is there. We don't see it at this point. Joseph doesn't recognize it yet. He will, but he doesn't recognize it yet. And so here he is in prison, but he's being blessed again. And so what happens? He rises right to the top again. Yes, the head jailer recognizes this man for what he is. Do you suppose that Potiphar might have even talked to him and explained to him some things, and then he gave him opportunities, Joseph opportunities, and he just simply rose again so that this man trusted him, even trusted the other prisoners to him? That seems strange, doesn't it? But this is what God is doing through this man. People respect him. What's my lesson for you here? Always look for good in adversity. When things seem to be going wrong, ask, as we would say in our phrases, look for the silver lining. We get that here from storm clouds. And when the storm is over, many times the storm clouds are going off and you can see the brightness of the sun around it and gives, as it were, the clouds a silver lining. Something good can come from that storm. Can we not see that in our lives as well? I look back through some times that I had in my life. I just simply would not ever want to relive those times. They were not good times. They were bad times. But now I can look and say, thank you, Father, for putting me through that. It has helped me. I now understand people in certain conditions better than I ever did before. I can have empathy for situations that I would have had just simply sympathy before. See, empathy is that where you've actually been and done what that other person has done, and you understand it because you've been there. And sympathy is something that is at a distance. You really haven't experienced it, but you feel sad for them. But I've had those experiences that give me empathy for others. And I look back and I can see that that was good for me. Oh, it wasn't good at the time, but it was good for me now. I can see it. These things can be in your life. I'm sure they are, and they are coming into your life, as they may well be into mine too. But look for the good in these things. Look for a way to turn it to good. Look for a way to help some other soul. All right, moving on into chapter 40. Into chapter 40. The interpretation now of the prisoner's dreams. 2 men, 2 dreams here, and he's going to interpret it for them. These are Pharaoh's men, very special men. His chief butler and his chief baker. They are put in the prison. Now can you see again, Joseph is placed into a preferred prison where Pharaoh's prisoners come, and here comes some of Pharaoh's prisoners, and we're going to see one of them come back out and be with Pharaoh again. Here's our link. Here's our tie. Here is providence working one more time. We're really short of time on this particular session, so I think I will close it down now and really come back in on chapter 40 in our next section. Read from about chapter 35 to the end of the book between now and next time. See you then.